There's people on here. Excellent. Hey guys, we're officially going to start in about 2 minutes, but just so you know, we are recording. And there's also a comment box over, you should be able to get to a comment box somewhere on your screen. Once we go into a screen share though, I will not be able to see the comments very easily. If you guys are on, you actually can unmute yourselves if you want to. We've got about a minute before I'm going to get started, and you can chat. Tell me how you're feeling. How do I sound? Good, that's great. No responses. So you guys know, as you're joining us, there is a 40-minute hard cap to this call. We're using a program called Zoom, and the free version's got a 40-minute cap. I thought about switching over to the paid-for version, which gives you unlimited time, but decided having a 40-minute cap was actually more valuable. It forces us to be intentional about what we're talking about and not get off tangent too bad. So, is that Sylvia? And Tara? All right, so it is 4 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So you guys know we are recording, and if for some reason you've got a problem, there is a chat box. I can see it, but not very well once we go into a screen share here. All right. So we got a PowerPoint presentation prepared for everybody today. And again, for those of you that are on, I'm going to put the link to this up. You can watch it again, and you will be able to share it if you want to. This information is good for everybody. There's a lot to cover here, and we're not going to cover all of it, but we will absolutely talk about a lot of stuff today, and we will cover more in part 2. And then we're going to have an additional part 3, which is going to be a Q&A. So keep track of the questions you have. We're going to collect questions, and we're going to do a whole webinar that is just our most frequently asked questions. All right, so for the last 10 years or so, Drew and I have been helping people become fitter, and we've seen how much easier it is to get results when athletes keep their nutrition dialed in. And we've seen how hard it is for people to get results when they're not paying attention to their nutrition. And guys, just I have to tell you that if exercise were the only thing that it took to get into shape, I would be a millionaire, because what we do is fun and what we do is addicting, and if it was all it took, then it would be way easier than it really is. But the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, it's not. I kind of have another slide for you that I think you'll find funny. But we know that you can't out-train a bad diet, and we know that even adding high-intensity exercise on top of a bad diet can have some detrimental effects as well. We've seen many times just how potent good nutrition habits and exercise can be when used together. So it's in our best service to our athletes and to our clients that we address nutrition just as aggressively as we would teach someone how to squat well or how to run correctly. It is just that important. Trying to out-train a bad diet is not going to work. I'm sorry. But the good news is that because there is an abundance of great food that is out there, it has never been as convenient to get as it is right now. In Savannah, we've got our farmers markets that are readily available. It's local. It's seasonal, it's fresh. On the coast, we've got a bounty of seafood that is fresh. And guys, like just organic and grass-fed meat and all that has, like, the price of it is coming down and it's been more affordable than ever. So even though out there there's still a lot of bad advice, temptations all over the place, and just overall bad marketing that kind of takes advantage of people wanting to eat healthy, unfortunately, there is still a ton of good available resources, and it can be easy to make healthy choices if you're following some just conventional wisdom. Let me pause here for a second, make sure you guys can hear me well. Sylvia and Robbie, I can see you, so would you give me a head nod? Okay, I know I've got this light behind me. I'm standing in my bathroom because it's the quietest part of my house at the moment. All right, so before we really dive into the food, I kind of have to get the obligatory disclosures out of the way. The bottom one being, I'm not a registered dietitian in the state of Georgia. I'm not allowed to write a meal plan, and as always, seek medical advice for any major changes that you make. But there's a couple other limitations to our discussion that I want to shed some light on. And the first is that, first thing is what you put into your body has many, many different reactions, and different people can have different reactions even to the same food. Whether that food is good or bad, your body can react to it in different ways. And so we're not just talking about genes, we're talking about things like different types of species in your gut biome, and the bacteria that's in your gut can be different from person to person, and that can affect how you digest your food and how it's absorbed. Just things like stress and previous illnesses, sleep, all of those things can have an effect on how food interacts with your body. So even from person to person, the same food can have a different effect. With that said, our next limitation is that research, it's always going to be lacking in the nutrition field, partially because what I just said, but also just because you can't control the experimental data for nutrition as well as you can in some of our other sciences. So there's a lot of information out there, but the bottom line is that you've got to be what we call an N=1 experiment, which is N=1 in the science field. N is our sample size. So basically you're going to have to do your own experiments with a sample size of 1, which is you, and figure out what works for you. As an example of that, me personally, I've got an autoimmune condition that affects my thyroid, and I found out over the course of doing multiple challenges like these that eggs are actually an issue for me. But because the effect of the eggs is so small, like barely even noticeable, and it's so gradual that there's this time delay between when I would eat and when there was actually an effect, that it's really murky to see what the effect of your food can be. So in my case, we actually went through about 3 challenges in a year and a half before I realized that by the end of each challenge, I would start to have symptoms that were like cold and achy and feeling fluey and not recovering from exercise as quickly as I should. And I realized that the one thing that all these challenges had in common was that when we cut out eating sugar and we ate less grains, that we tended to eat eggs for breakfast every morning. And our egg consumption went way up when we were on the challenges. And that's what, over time, allowed me to realize that, okay, maybe there's a connection there. And so for you, just understand that it's kind of naive to assume that certain foods don't affect you, because you really don't know sometimes until you take it out for a long period of time, reintroduce that food. You've got to be very scientific about it, because sometimes you can't feel, there's not an immediate effect of our food. So diving in now, as we go into talking about our food, there's really 2 major ways that it can affect our body. It can affect our hormones, and it can affect inflammation. And when it comes to hormones, I always like to ask who's been pregnant or who's lived with someone who's been pregnant. Because if you've ever gone through that experience, you know that there is no part of your body that hormones don't affect and don't touch. And our food can drastically affect our hormones as well. So everything from energy levels to that mental clarity and that brain fog, to the foods that we're craving, emotional, how we're feeling, even physically, that feeling hot, feeling cold. Ask any woman that's having hot flashes and they know. Our ability to just handle stress, our quantity and quality of sleep. Our hormones affect our immune system, our metabolism, whether or not we're going to store fat or release fat. Everything is affected by hormones. And our food can make or break that. We're going to talk more specifically about hormones in part 2, but for now we're going to talk about how our food affects inflammation. And before we go into inflammation, I'm going to go into our prescription for food and what to eat. So from CrossFit.com, this is our prescription for food that we've been telling people for the last 10 years, and we really have never varied much from it because it is our baseline and what works. But it's to eat lean meats and veggies, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugar. We want to eat enough to sustain activity levels, but not body fat. If you guys kind of pare it down to that, if I could say it in just a couple of words, our goal is to eat a wide variety of God-made food. Things that are found in nature with limited processing, that is in its most natural form as we can get it, and a variety as much as possible. Our final philosophy here is we want to use food first. We want to use food as our first wave to create change in body composition. And by that, what I mean is that we're going to attack food. Pardon me for a second. Sometimes I gotta lock the kids out of the bathroom too. Sorry. We gotta attack food first. Before we start really diving into supplements and we start diving into even ketogenic diets and stuff like that, we just need to get the basics right. We start to nerd out on all those other things before we figure some of this stuff out. It's kind of like doing some of those things that make us successful, but we haven't developed that stability yet, and we need to get that squared away. So when we talk about food affecting inflammation, let's talk about inflammation for a little bit. Inflammation is great when you've got a bug bite. Inflammation is great when you've got a broken bone. That flush of healing chemicals and hormones at the side of the wound, because that's the body's ability to heal itself. It's an amazing thing. When we come across bacteria and viruses and our entire body systemically becomes inflamed, and it allows us to fight that virus or that foreign invader, that's inflammation, and it's an amazing miracle that our bodies can do that. The downside of inflammation comes when it's an inappropriate response. We don't want to be inflamed all the time. We want to be inflamed when we're fighting something or need healing, but not at the times when we don't. The level of inflammation should be appropriate to what is going on into our body. And now we know that most of our chronic illnesses have some kind of root cause in inflammation that is exaggerated and uncontrolled, lasts for too long and lingers and is chronic. Inflammation here can really keep our tissues from functioning normally. It can wear them down. It can lead to us storing fat when we shouldn't be, storing fat, and it can decrease our time for healing injuries. So our goal here of eating lean meats and veggies, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugar, is to also avoid the foods that we know cause inflammation. So here's our major players. We got sugar, Gluten and other lectins, dairy, and alcohol are the 4 that we're going to talk about today. The sugar's number 1 on here. And guys, if you don't get anything else out of this call or anything else out of the nutrition aspect of Momentum Builder, I hope that you get this. Sugar, excessive sugar intake leads to chronic inflammation and is probably the easiest thing, relatively easiest thing, to take out of your diet. If there's one thing that you're able to do and you let the rest of it, don't even worry about the rest of it, if you can take out the beverages that have sugar in it and take out the sweet foods, you will be doing yourself more of a favor for the rest of your life than anything else that you do. So when we consume a lot of excessive sugar, what happens is our liver gets flooded with fructose, and we end up with a lot of chronic inflammation. It's basically a super high way of storing fat in your body. And not just that, but there's a lot of research that shows sugar is linked to depression, and it affects a lot of the neurotransmitters in the brain. Even kids with ADHD symptoms are improved when we start to take sugar out of their diet. The bottom line here is that no matter who you are, you're going to be happier, you're going to be healthier without sugar. Moving on to gluten and lectins, right now I know that gluten-free is kind of trendy. I want folks to understand that what gluten is and the fact that it's actually not the only, it's in a class of proteins, of plant proteins called lectins, and gluten is not the only one. So even though our primary source of gluten in our diet right now for most Americans is wheat, many of our other grains and legumes and plants that evolved to not be eaten contain this protein called a lectin as part of the seed. And again, it's kind of an evolutionary strategy. They evolved not to be eaten, and so they've got these chemicals that are in their seed that cause sickness and illness, even death in the animals that eat them. And the reason why we want to try to avoid it is simply because it disturbs the integrity of the lining of our gut. So instead of, a normal healthy gut only allows the smallest of the compounds of our food to pass through into the bloodstream, when the gut lining is disturbed, the bacteria that's in the gut and the other larger particles that haven't been digested all the way also pass through. And the problem with that is that the larger particles look like bacteria, they look like viruses, and your body just mounts this major immune army of cells to go after those particles. And that in itself will cause that inflammation is kind of a major player in leading to some autoimmune conditions. So if you want more information on that, our term for it is leaky gut. And I know that sounds disgusting, but if you Google leaky gut, you'll get a ton of information and kind of some ideas on why gluten and lectin and foods such as wheat and grains are things that we really should be avoiding. They're not the health food that they've been made out to be. And we can talk more about this when we do our Q&A. There are some healthier ways to consume grains in how we process them to remove most of the lectins. That's kind of a topic for another time. But for the most part, we should be getting the carbohydrates we need from other vegetables and from fruits, and we're doing fine. Even if your gut isn't leaky, just the inflammation that can be caused in your gut by gluten and lectins and other of the characters in wheat, they can really mess with your ability to absorb nutrients. And so if your gut is inflamed, you're not absorbing the food that you put into it, you're doing yourself a big disservice. I want folks to realize that it is possible to be overfed and malnourished at the same time. So absorption here is super, super, super important. It comes into play when we talk about dairy as well. Most people know that the lactose in milk can cause some issues in adults that are lacking the enzyme to digest it. but it's actually not the reason why we have it on the list here. The reason why dairy is on the list is because one of the two proteins in dairy, called casein, is highly inflammatory, both in your gut, and it can cause histamine-like reactions. So folks who have allergies or asthma, acne as well, can get all that can be made worse by consuming dairy. Casein can kind of cause this just histamine, hay fever-like response, and we want to try to avoid that. And again, just like with the gluten and the other lectins and the sugar, when these affect your gut, you don't absorb nutrients. So calcium is a great area of debate. I love talking about calcium and how to get it, and we'll save that for our Q&A as well. But the big takeaway here is that you don't have to be chugging milk in order to get calcium, because if your body's not absorbing it, it doesn't matter. If your gut is healthy, then you will absorb the calcium, and you'll get plenty from the fruits and the vegetables that you eat and from the other good foods. So our final usual suspect here when we're talking about inflammation is alcohol, and I love talking about this at the beginning of a challenge. Guys, alcohol is a neurotoxin. It is a depressant. Even if you just have one drink and you don't feel drunk and you don't feel hungover, the effects over time, that mental clarity, that brain fog is there. It affects your sleep. A lot of people will have a drink at the end of the night to help manage stress, and it feels like it helps you get to sleep better. But in reality, I think that you can manage stress a whole lot better if you get a good night's sleep and you're not depressed during the day and you're clear-headed so that you can make better decisions. We include alcohol in this list because of the way that it really can cause some serious inflammation over time, even if what you're drinking is just a drink or two at night. Even if you're never drunk and never hungover, if you drink with good frequency, that can definitely have some major inflammatory responses in your body. So that is the major part of what I'm going to tell you guys for today as far as foods to avoid. This is part one. In part two, we're going to talk about managing the quantity of our food and how to put them together, how to use that to manipulate insulin levels. And if we can control insulin levels, that's our key player to controlling all the other hormones. And we're going to talk a little bit more about micronutrients, all the vitamins and minerals that your body needs. And again, variety here, guys. If you can get the micronutrients that you need and you can absorb them and your body is well fed, then we just see those cravings go away. We didn't talk today about some of the unhealthy fats that we also know cause inflammation. But we do know that our processed seed oils, hydrogenated oils, soybean oils, those guys can have a major effect on inflammation as well. We're going to talk about that in part two, and then we'll talk about hydration as well. But for now, I'm going to leave you with your homework and then a final thought. So your homework for this week, and you should have seen this already, but is to clean out of your cupboards, your fridge, the stuff that you know is junk, that no one has to tell you is junk, you know it's junk. Part two of that is to go to the store and stock up on handy, healthy snacks. Convenient being important here, because when you guys find yourself hungry and you're tempted to just grab whatever that first thing is, you need to have something on hand. This is definitely a stabilizing factor here. This is having stuff on hand that you can grab and you're not running to the vending machine. So fruit's great, nuts are great, carrots. Just find some alternatives to the sugary beverages. Drew and I have kind of been on a flavored seltzer water kick recently, and I can tell you that's made a huge difference. But have this stuff on hand, and I'm not going to give you a million resources on purpose. I want you to find them. I want you to see what works for you. And then the last part of this is to eat a compliant breakfast each day. So everyone should be registered for the Whole Life Challenge at this point. You should see kind of what nutrition levels are and have an idea of which one you're going to pick. Your team leader can help you out on that if you got questions. But even at the very basic level, you're taking out most of the grains. I want you to try to get a breakfast in every day that is not sweet and doesn't have any of the grains in it. And I would really challenge you to rethink what our typical American idea of breakfast is. It does not have to be cereal and bagels and toast. This morning I had scrambled eggs. I do eat some eggs. A grapefruit, and bacon. One of my favorite breakfasts is tuna with a half an avocado mashed in it, some lime juice, garlic salt, and then scoop it up with an apple. Sustain you for hours. Leftover pot roast, absolutely delicious for breakfast. Leftover salmon, fabulous for breakfast. So really challenge you guys to kind of question your notion of what breakfast should be. But the better, more nutrients you can get there in the morning, the less cravings you're going to have during the day, the better your whole day is going to go. And so that's pretty exciting. Final slide that I have for you guys here is something I want you to think about for the rest of this challenge. Drew talked about it yesterday when he said our goal is not to be perfect. But I want you to think about good, better, and best. And when it comes to our food, we know what's best, but if best is not in your budget, or it's not available, or it's not what you can do right at that moment, then I want you to shoot for better. I don't want you to go slide all the way down to bad just because you can't have what's best. If you can't get what's best, it's not an excuse to go get McDonald's. You're going to go for the next best thing. And sometimes just, taking that mindset of asking yourself, what's the best thing that I could be eating right now? Your brain will fill in that question. Your brain will answer that question with good answers. What you think of might actually surprise you. So do the best with what you have. This chart right here I took, and I know it's got some grains on there, and I know it's got dairy on there, which we said were bad. So this is not a chart that I made, but I just wanted you guys to see it. I wanted you to kind of get an idea that, just because I can't buy fresh, seasonal, organic vegetables doesn't mean I shouldn't try to make a salad with the stuff that I have, and the stuff I can afford, or the stuff that's available. So I hope that this is a blessing to all of you guys. I hope that you learned something new. I would love it if you would go into the Momentum Builder Facebook page and maybe just put up one or two things that you got out of being on the call today and listening to this. And I hope you have a fantastic Sunday. And let me come out of my screen share for a moment. And I really thought we were going to run over on time, but we still have about 5 or 6 minutes. So let me just kind of see if there's any questions from you guys. You have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to. I know Christy found the chat. There is also a chat box. I'll give it about 30 more seconds. If no one has questions, we'll go ahead and end the call. I got a Linda raised her hand. Go ahead, Linda.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh my God, I could have been saying anything this whole time. I just wanted to see if that function worked. Sorry. I am so glad I didn't start eating my apple while I was watching this thing. Sorry. All right. Anyway, the function works,
Yeah.
and now we know if you say anything, you'll be heard. So thanks for the talk, Jen.
You're welcome. All right, we'll see you guys. We'll do the same thing for part 2 next Sunday at the same time. So enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you later.
Thanks, you too. Bye.